Hi, so we'll talk about India and China in this video series. This video series will be of three different parts. The first part will cover the historical background and the political structures of the two countries. The second part will talk about the economic situation of both countries, why China seems to be significantly better than India and diversified in economics, and what does India depend on China for? Is there any dependence of China on India? So we'll talk about all that. We'll also take each and every economic indicator, try to understand what that economic indicator means and how it applies to both these countries. So that will be part 2. In part 3, we'll talk about the various points of conflict between the two countries, starting from the war, from the 1961-62 war, then the Doklam crisis in 2018 and 2020 clashes. So this will be a 3-part series. It's slightly longish. The first one will be about history, completely about history. We are talking about this because we want to understand where the two countries have really come from, and then we will get a better sense of where it is going forward. So this is the historical background part. So we'll start. The first slide here talks about the old world. So in the initial stages, when the world was not fully discovered, the people really thought that this was the extent of world. They did not even know that other nations beyond the Sahara Desert existed. They did not know that there was an America. They did not know that there was South America and all that. So that those two continents were totally undiscovered. A lot of places were undiscovered. So Europe was very well known. Extensive contacts existed between Europe, Turkey, Persia, between India, China, and to some extent in Sahara Desert. So this is the extent of the world. And in this concept of an old world, India and China were just extremely important. Their combined economy was far more than anything else that Europe could imagine at that point of time. Europe was simply a collection of tribes. 2,000, 3,000 years ago, it was only a collection of tribal people. It did not have a lot of resources of its own. It had to depend on other people for many resources. It had extensive trade with Turkey and Persia to get a lot of resources. It was very reliant on India for clothes specifically, because India had cotton, India had spices, so these things were exported all the way to Europe since ancient times. And China was also important because China discovered tea, and China also discovered silk, so it was very good with silk. And Chinese products, one of the other Chinese products which was very famous was porcelain. So India and China had a lot of exports to the rest of the world, rest of the old world at least, and that is how the old world was. It was very significant. So specifically talking about the economic performance of these countries, this is a graph which talks about the GDP, the share of GDP of different world powers starting from the very ancient times till the modern period. So this graph starts from 180 at the time of the birth of Christ, and then it comes all the way to 2017. So this graph is not really linear, as clearly mentioned here. It is non-linear scale. Especially from 1 to 1820, it is completely non-linear. So in this part, this is actually a screenshot from the economic survey of 2019-20 of our country. So the context of context of having this graph was to talk about the significance of Indian economy in the ancient world. So they clearly say that from 1 to 1500 AD, India was really dominating the world, the share of world GDP. India was extensively very important. Why this is the case? This is because India and China had a lot of population, and the economy of the ancient times was solely based on agriculture and pastoral activities. So the more number of people you had, the better your economic performances. In the sense, the higher your overall economy sizes. So India was extremely huge, and China was also comparative. So these two countries were really good. And then in the modern time, just to have a sense of scale, in the modern time, China is at least 3 times bigger than India in the scale of economy. But still, India and China put together, they are extremely significant in the modern day also. So that is about the share of world GDP, and to stress the importance of India and China. We'll talk about the political history of these two countries from the ancient and medieval period. We'll talk about each of these countries first. We'll try to understand interrelationships and how they developed, if they had any contacts and all. So we'll start with our own country. So in India, you had the ancient period and the medieval period. We'll talk about the modern period from the British era in a subsequent slide. So in the ancient period, you had Indus Valley civilization. It was one of the most ancient civilizations in the world. It was very prosperous. It had a lot of inventions of its own. and its most significant aspect was trade. So it had extensive trade relations with neighboring civilizations, especially Mesopotamia. So Indus Valley civilization prospered, and it existed in modern day Afghanistan and Pakistan. So that was it also extended to Indian parts of Punjab and Gujarat. So that was the extent of Indus Valley civilization. And then after that you have Mahajanapadas. In the ancient time, 2000, 3000, 4000 years ago, the Ganga Yamuna Valley was not very highly populated. It was a collection of forests, and some tribal people existed in the region. But it is said that Aryan invasion happened from the northwest. So from the northwest, Aryan invasion happened, especially people from Indus Valley civilization. They migrated to this region. For some reason, Indus Valley perished after some time. We are yet to discover the actual reasons. Many say that it was because of some sudden flood. Many say that it could have been a prolonged drought, and so on. So the reasons are not very clear. But the people eventually migrated to the Ganga Yamuna Valley, and Ganga Yamuna Valley is extremely fertile. It is a very beautiful place if you want to get into agriculture. So that is where the agricultural society of our country started in modern day Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And Mahajanapadas, the word actually refers to a large collection of different states. So one of the most important and powerful states here is Magadha, because Magadha was very strong. It was not defeated for a very long time, and it had its center in modern day Patna. So that was Magadha. So the timeline here is this happened about 2500 years before Christ, and these kingdoms here, Mahajanapadas, these kingdoms started from 2500 BC all the way till 500 BC. So that was the extent of these kingdoms, and under these kingdoms the Vedic religion started. The present form of Hinduism is from the Vedic religion, and you also had Buddhism, which started in the late 700 600 BC. So that was the time. And then you had the Mauryan Empire. So the Mauryan Empire is very famous. It was very extensive. It was one of the first empires to consolidate a very large area of modern day India. So the Mauryan Empire at its peak, it had its area from modern day Afghanistan, Pakistan. It covered the entirety of North India. It covered Maharashtra, it covered Orissa, Bengal, and all that. So Mauryan Empire was started by Chandragupta Maurya. So you would have known Chandragupta Maurya by relating him with Chanakya. Chanakya was a very cunning person. He was a person who wanted to take revenge against some people, and he used his cunning and in general his political ambition to get to a very big empire. So Chandragupta Maurya was actually a person of very humble origin. He was not a ruler. He was not the son of any ruler, but Chanakya supported him, and then he eventually became a ruler of a very large empire. So after Chandragupta Maurya, his successors enlarged the empire even more. It was under Ashoka that the empire was probably at its very peak in terms of area, in terms of cultural existence and all that. So by the time of Ashoka, Buddhism gained official patronage. Ashoka was one of the person to give official status to this Buddhism, but at the same time he was also very tolerant towards other religion, which was Hinduism at that time. So Ashokan empire was very spread out. And after Ashoka, there were other rulers in that Mauryan Empire who were not as effective or efficient militarily, and even in the way in which they ruled. So there were invasions from the northwest part of India. Throughout the Indian history, there is this common narrative of having invasions from the northwest territory, because that is where people existed who wanted to take the resources from India. So you could imagine the fertile plains of our country. It was having a lot of resources, but in other parts of the world, resources were not there, especially in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So they always had to come here. So Kushans were one of the first people they had Bactrian heritage. Bactrian was one of the ruling factions in Eurasia. So from there they came to India, and they had some time with the Indian civilization. They ruled it for some time. Then we have the Gupta Empire, which returned back to a ruling which was based on Hinduism and Buddhism combined. So it was indigenous. So Gupta Empire was also very extensive. Under Gupta Empire, arts and culture flourished. So even now, a lot of sculptures and everything that you see, they are from this particular timeline. So this was there, but at the same time, you also had different empires in the southern part of India. All this happened, all this that we are talking about, Indus Valley, Mahajanapadas, Mauryan Empire, Kushans and Gupta Empire, they had their extension from at their extent, to the maximum extent, it was still Afghanistan, and then it went all the way till Bengal, to some extent Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra. But these four rulers, they existed simultaneously in the southern part of India, and they were ruling very prosperously. The prosperity was so good that they were very good with sea also. They were so good that they had extensive contacts with people in Greece, all the way till Greece. So even now in Tamil Nadu, you have a village where you can find a lot of artifacts which are from Greece. So that is one thing. They also had extensive contacts with China and all. And these people also had extensive contacts with Indochina, the modern day Malaysia and all that. So even now, if you go to Malaysia, there are a lot of people who are from the southern part of India. So that's about that. And then one of the last empires in India in the ancient period was Harsha. So Harsha was a very famous ruler. He was known for his justice. He was known for the overall prosperity which given to the people of his reign. So Harsha also had extensive contacts during this period. They also had extensive contacts with China. So that was about the ancient period. So in the medieval period, these two ruling factions, Chalukyas and Rashtrakutas, they were restricted to the southern part of India. Chalukyas were in northern part of Karnataka. After them, you had Rashtrakutas. They extended their reign all the way from Karnataka to Maharashtra and then Gujarat and some parts of Rajasthan. So Rashtrakutas extended that way. Again, you come back to the Muslim rule. The Muslim rule was not, intended to be the Muslim rule. In general, the trend was people were coming from northwest all the time. They attacked all the time. So before the Delhi Sultanate was established in the 1200s and late 1100s, multiple invasions from the Arab and Persian world came into our country. For example, you had Mahmud of Ghazni. He came and attacked India and Indian empires multiple times. He attacked 17 number of times. The basic aim of these raids were to take as many resources as possible so that they will survive in their land. So that was one thing, and then eventually one of the people who invaded, they became successful, and they thought, why not establish a kingdom here? So that was how Delhi Sultanate was established. In fact, when the beginning of Delhi Sultanate was done by a person called a dynasty called as the Mamluks. Mamluks are a group of people of Turkish origin. Turkish, Arabian and Persian origin. So these people, the person who established the Delhi Sultanate was actually a slave of one of the Muslim empires in the other part of the world. So Delhi Sultanate was established, and you also had multiple dynasties within the Delhi Sultanate. You initially had the Mamluks, then you had the Tughlaqs, and then the Lodhis. So the timeline here is again Harsha's empire that happened between this entire Chola Pandavas, Chera, Pandyas, Cholas. This happened between it happened between 500 and 1000 AD. This Chalukyas and Rashtrakutas, they happened in the late part of 800-900 AD, and Delhi Sultanate was established in close to 1200 AD. So that was the timeline. Vijayanagara Empire was a very famous and flourishing empire in the southern part of India. It was centered in Karnataka-Maharashtra border. So they flourished there, especially in Hampi, in Mysore. So that's why they flourished. Vijayanagara Empire is known for the particular king, Vikramaditya, and the empire is also known for culture in general. So that was about them. The Delhi Sultanate were meanwhile ruling in Delhi, and then they perished after some time with the rise of the Mughals. The Mughals are people who have a mixed origin. They have some links to the Mongols. They also have some links to the Turkish people. So the Mughals eventually came here, and you know the different rulers of Mughals. You have you're starting from Babur, and then you have Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb, and all of them. So Mughals were ruling for quite a long time, and it is about Mughals that you would have learnt in your school for most of the time. Mughals had a very rich culture and heritage. Initially, they were seen as outsiders, but after some time, they became part of the country. They brought a lot of art and culture from Persia, especially the Muslim arts. In some cases, they tried to impose the religion. In some cases, they did not. For example, Akbar was very tolerant towards other religion. Aurangzeb, on the other hand, was not very tolerant towards other religions. So those are the different aspects. You also have two very important people here, Rajputs and Marathas. So Rajputs were restricted to modern day Rajasthan. So they were restricted to Rajasthan. And Mughals and Rajputs were kind of enemies for most of the time. They were fighting all the time. But at some point, they also had to form uneasy alliances between the two to keep peace. So that also existed. Marathas are the people who started from Maharashtra. They had their base in Maharashtra. They were very ambitious people and very powerful people. Chhatrapati Shivaji is one famous person who resisted the Mughals. And then their entire line was very fierce. They were very good. They were very skilled. Marathas were, at some point, Marathas became so powerful that they could easily go all the way to Delhi. And they also had some treaties with the Mughal people, because Marathas were not really one single ruling party. They were a collection of multiple prominent families. So some families chose to have links with Mughals, some families chose to have links with Rajputs. So these three people were ruling for a major part of the time. You also had this Mysore Empire, which was related to the Vijayanagara Empire. Vijayanagara Empire was initially there, it declined, and it came under the control of the Mughals. But after some time, you have Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan was a person who had his origin from the Mughal rule. His father was actually a ruler. His father was actually a soldier under the Mughal army. But eventually, they had links with the family, Vijayanagara family, the dynastic family, and then they were able to establish a separate empire, the Mysore Empire. So this was also very famous. So this is basically the overview of ancient period and medieval period of India. So the basic feature here to notice, it was the civilization here is very old. It started long way back, about 4,000 years ago, and then it progressed slowly. You had multiple kingdoms coming in. The point of talking about all these kingdoms is to just know that which kingdoms existed when. Because for example, if someone asks you if Chandragupta Maurya ever fought a war with the Marathas, you'll be able to say no. So that is the whole point. So the timeline is basically that, and then a lot of rulers existed. India was not always a one single entity. Sometimes powerful rulers emerged who controlled a major part, but most of the times it was split into multiple entities. Especially there was a very sharp disconnect between southern part of India and the northern part of India. So that's the overview of the Indian history. We'll talk about Chinese history now. So Chinese civilization is also very, very old. It is an ancient civilization of the Yellow River and the fertile North China Plain. So this North China Plain that we are talking about, it is very fertile. There is archaeological evidence that rice was cultivated in this plain way back in 11,500 BC. So that's approximately 12,000, 13,000 years ago. So that was that. Agriculture flourished. It was a mixture of nomadic life and some amount of agricultural life, just like in India. And then, just like in India, you had a kingdom, a dynasty which started close to 2000 BC, 2000 to 1600 BC. It is said to be the Zia dynasty. It continued for 400 years. But the picture here is not very clear. Once you go beyond 1000 BC, it's not very clear how things happen. That's the case for India and China also. Then you had the Shang dynasty, that was another major dynasty, and during this time, China really began to organize itself for the first time. So that was one thing. During the Zhao dynasty, it was if you notice one thing here, Zhao dynasty was between 1046 and 256, and the Warring States period was between 722 and 256. So there is an overlap here because just like in India, China was not a one single entity governed by one single ruler. It was split into multiple parts. So that was the major point between India and China. So that was that. So Zhao was, they continued to rule from 1046 to 256. That was close to some, 700 years. And then you have the Warring States period for about 400 years. So under the Zhao dynasty, you had a lot of cultural revolution that happened. Under the Warring States period, two major things happened. Multiple entities existed in China and they wanted control over the mainland China. At the same time, you also had the Cultural Revolution of China, because this is the period in which it is said that more than 100 different schools of philosophy existed, and poets, a lot of famous poets in China are from this particular region. Then for the first time, you have the Qing dynasty from 221 to 206 BC. So this is very old. This is a contemporary of our Mauryan Empire here. So that is a contemporary. So you can see the link here. Qing dynasty was for to mention the fact, Qing dynasty, for the first time under this dynasty, China as a proper entity, as it is the modern borders, it was really accomplished with the Qing dynasty. So initially they were restricted to only the eastern parts where the fertile plains existed, but under the Qing dynasty they covered parts of Mongolia, they covered parts of modern day Uyghur region, for example. They covered the entirety of Tibet and all that. So these Mauryan Empire and the Qing dynasty, for the first time, they came in close contact. Before that, India and China did not have a close contact. They had a huge border of the Himalayas in between. So the Chinese people did not have much link with the Indian people. But under these two dynasties, these two empires, they were able to have some contacts. And during this time, between 400 to 200 BC, Buddhism for the first time was propounded, and it was taken to China. In China, it was embraced because Buddhism is a religion which is kind of democratic. It is also it's not based on religious rituals. So it was very attractive to the people of China, and aspects of Buddhism were taken up in their own religion. For example, it was covered in Confucianism. So Qing dynasty and Mauryan dynasty were contemporaries. Also, you had the Han dynasty, which is also one of the most prosperous dynasties in Chinese empire. So it is under the Han dynasty that Silk Road as a proper route of trade with other parts of the world was established. The routes existed, but they were very not very frequent under the Qing dynasty. But under Han, it was established properly for the first time. So it is during this time that the European people and the people in Eurasia, they discovered that China had a lot of things to sell them. For example, they were selling tea and silk, for example, tea, silk and porcelain. So China was very good at all that, and they sold it to the people. Then you had the Jin dynasty, some other dynasty which continued. In the medieval period, you had the Tang dynasty, which was considered to be extremely successful between 618 and 907. Under this, China expanded very greatly. Its borders were expanded. It had a very proper way of administrative system, and all of these things were done. Song dynasty is something that is it's considered to be a golden age of Chinese civilization. It existed before 1271. Between 907 AD and 1271, 4 different empires existed in China. One of them was Song. So Song was very famous because it led to 3 or 4 major inventions. So the first one was paper. Paper was there are references to paper in ancient Egypt, but paper was properly invented in China. And with paper, they also invented the printing press, modern day printing press, and paper was used in currency notes. It was used for administrative purposes and all that. Before that, we did not have paper usage in general. So that was one thing. The other major class of invention was related to gunpowder. So these are the people who first invented gunpowder. So if gunpowder is invented, obviously they also invented bombs, they also invented cannons, and they could be used for guns as such in the later period. So that was the Song dynasty. Then you had the Yuan dynasty. Yuan dynasty was established, as usual, not by. This is similar to our Mughal dynasty. Mughals were originally not part of India; they were outsiders. Yuans are not really parts of India. They are actually tribal people from the northern part of China, from Manchuria and Mongolia. So they came on. They attacked the existing dynasty here, and then they took over. So Yuan dynasty was also kind of prosperous. They continued to have trade relations with all the people. Then Ming dynasty is another very famous dynasty which continued for quite a long time. And after Ming, the last dynasty, the last empire in China was the Qing dynasty. So it is under the Qing dynasty that for the second time in Chinese history, China went to the greatest lengths of its borders. So the Qing dynasty was so extensive that in the 1800s and all, it was governing the one third of the world population. It was clearly the largest economy in the world, and it is probably the largest empire to ever exist. So that was the Qing Empire. It was so extensive at its peak. So this is the basic overview of India and China. We'll try to understand some common points here. So this is a modern day satellite view of India and China. So in India and China, the common points to remember, just to summarize. So there are places which are very fertile. For example, the Indo-Gangetic Plain. So in the Gangetic Plain, the fertility is very high, the population could be very high, agriculture could be practiced and all. Similarly, here in China, this entire region was extremely fertile. It was very suitable for rice cultivation. Not just rice, so many other plants could be cultivated here, and food was never a problem with this part of the country. So as you could see, the people, this is a proper part of China. The proper Chinese people did not have proper contacts with the people of India. It was only when the Mauryan Empire extended all the way from here, and it was only when the Qing Empire extended all the way till here, that some contact existed over the Takli-Makan Desert. So over this contact, Indian people and Chinese people exchanged a lot of knowledge and resources. India had some trade with China, and mostly it was about Buddhist scholars. So Buddhist scholars migrated from here to here. Under the period of Harsha, if you remember, there was this very famous pilgrim from China. His name was Huansang. So Huansang came to India. He studied the Indian people. He wrote extensively about India in his own Chinese. And under this particular period, under Harsha's reign, there was an embassy established between India and China for the first time. So these things existed. So there is also this concept of a Silk Road. So obviously people in China are very far away from the rest of Europe, from the rest of the old world at least. So they had to go all the way to through Gobi Desert, through Takli-Makan, through Central Asia, and then they had to establish. So if you remember, under the Han dynasty, for the first time, Silk Road was established. So Chinese products could be sold to rest of the world. But India had already established trade links with the rest of the world for a very, very long time. So the Silk Road was function based on that. There is also this other concept of invasions coming from different parts. Like I mentioned before, this is a fertile region, and these are desert regions where resource is very scarce. So the people here, they often are in short of resources. They fight amongst each other. They were basically tribals or basically nomadic people. They came all the way to India to gain resources. For example, Mahmud of Ghazni attacked Gujarat and parts of India more than 17 times before the Delhi Sultanate was established. And similarly, for the case of China, this region was very prosperous. It was settled. It was an agricultural region. But the people here, the Mongolian tribes and the Manchurian tribes, they were not very prosperous. They had very harsh conditions to live. So they frequently raided this place, and they tried to get resources. So the problem was so extensive that one very successful and strong empire in China, they decided to build the Great Wall of China all the way from here. So that will be the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China, in modern day, you can actually see it from the International Space Station. So that is the level of, that is the extent to which they went to keep away outsiders from coming in. But that was not very successful. Thanks for watching this video. We'll continue this topic in the next video.